We picked up yesterday with the question of writing, and the third Mishnah began Hakotev shtei otiot bein bi minor bein bi smolo, someone who writes two letters, whether his right or whether with his left. And this idea of writing two letters runs right through the rest of this chapter. So we're going to pick up on Mishnah 4, and it starts exactly the same way. Hakotev shtei otiot, someone who writes two letters. We learned yesterday that the minimum quantity of the minimum number of letters one has to write in order to bring a sin offering is two. Two is a critical, it's a critical quantity. Once we've written two letters, we have a word, or we have an ability to match together two beams from the Mishkan. So hakotev shtei otiot, someone who writes two letters. Be'elem echad chayav. In one state of unawareness, someone forgot it was Shabbat and wrote two letters. And at the end of the chapter will close on someone who wrote in two states of unawareness. He forgot it was Shabbat, he wrote a letter, and then he remembered maybe, and then maybe in the afternoon he forgot again, and he wrote a letter. And we're going to deal with that case at the end of the chapter. So if you like, that case is the mirror image of this case, which comes exactly halfway through the chapter. And then we have a list of dyes or materials. Katav, b'dio, b'sam, b'sikra, b'komos, b'kan tom, b'chol davash hu roshem in any. If he wrote with ink, there's a whole. The translations of these things are not necessarily clear, but we're definitely dio is ink. Some can be poison, but it seems to be paint here. Sikra is some kind of red paint. In Gittin, in the story of the destruction of the Jerusalem, there's a terrorist called Abba Sikra, maybe he had red paint on his face or something. Abba Sikra, the father of red paint. But komos is gum from a tree. Maybe they used to make, put a dye into the gum of the tree. Tom is a Greek word which Wikipedia translates as blue vitriol. It's something that we seem to know today. It's a blue dye. And then the Mishnah concludes with with anything that makes marks, basically anything permanent. And in fact, there's a parallel Mishnah in Gittin, which I brought on your source sheet. Second chapter of Gittin, just outlining what you can use to write a get. And it's exactly the same list of stuff: ink, paint, red paint, gum, blue vitriol. And then that Mishnah closes, Uv'chol davar shehu shel kayama, anything that is permanent. So basically, we write with something which is permanent, we're chayav, for a sin offering. And then we're going to talk about where we write it. Well, okay, what about al shnei kotlei zavit? What if we wrote it on two walls, but they meet in a corner? Ve'al shnei luchot pinkas, two boards of a writing tablet. Ve'hein nehegin zein zeh, they can be read together. And the Mishnah says chayav. We'll learn the opposite of all of these cases in a minute. Hakotev al basaro chayav, someone who writes on his flesh is liable. In England, people always used to say you could write a check on a cow. You can write, and in fact, the Mishnah in Gittin explains, by the way, you can write a get on a cow, as providing you can give the cow providing you can hand over the cow. Ha-masaret al-basar, if you scratch on yourself, this is more like tattoo. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatat. Rabbi Eliezer says it will make him liable. Rabbi Yoshua poter. Sorry, the Hebrew text here says Rabbi Yoshua poter. I'm sorry, I didn't notice this. And the translation from Safari says the sage is exempt. The commentary says the sage is exempt. I think Rabbi Yoshua probably is a variant text here. You have to write in the normal way of writing to be chayav. And the Mishnah is then going to explain the opposite cases. So, katav mashkin. By the way, the opposite cases are also quoted in Gittin. So, in Gittin, we have the list of inks that work and the list of inks that don't work, like liquids or fruit juice and stuff that is not permanent. And our Mishnah then carries on with the same list. Katav mashkin v'mei perot. What if we write with liquids or with fruit juice or on the dust of the road or on writer's powder? This is powder that's, if you're a traditional sofer, there's black powder going all over the place, right? You use this powder to write with, or anything that doesn't last. Patur. Kol davar she'eino mitkayem patur. Anything that doesn't last, we're exempt. Maybe you draw two letters on the sand in the beach, for example. It doesn't last, you're exempt, at least from drawing, from writing. L'achar yado, with the back of his hand, beraglo, befiv, uvmar pakto, with the back of his hand, with his foot, with his mouth, with his elbow. We've seen this Mishnah before, actually. We've seen it when we were learning about carrying. Remember when we learned about carrying, we said, look, if we carry something in a backhanded manner with a foot, with a mouth, with an elbow, and then the Mishnah there, it's in the, it's actually the 10th, it's the 10th chapter, 6th Mishnah. Then he went on to say in his ear, in his hair, in his belt, he's not chayav. And we're repeating this, we seem to be repeating this list here, with the back of his hand, with his foot, in any unusual way. If you wrote a letter near a written text, this is a really interesting one. Katav ot achat samuch lichtav. So we haven't written two letters, but we've written one letter next to another letter that's already written on a text. Or uchtav al gabei ktav. Maybe we wrote on top of another letter. Or nitkaven lichtov chet v'katav shnei zaynim. Maybe we intended to write a chet. A chet looks like two zines. We ended up writing two zines. So we wrote two letters, but we intended to write one. Or maybe echad ba'aretz ve'echad b'koreh. Maybe we wrote a letter on the ground, another on a beam. Or maybe we wrote on two walls, two boards of a writing tablet, but they can't be read together. Or maybe, yes, that's the last example. Patur, he's exempt. All of these examples are all the opposite of the examples in the previous Mishnah, and we're patur. Katav ot achat, notarikon. Notarikon's a Greek word, and it seems to mean, well, it's an abbreviation or it's a shorthand. I've translated it here as shorthand. Clearly, there's a clear relationship with the Greek, with today's word in English, notary, which is derived from Greek. Notarikon is a Greek word meaning to make notes. Katav ot achat notarikon. So we've only got one letter, but it means a whole word. So maybe R for rabbi, or Kuf for kara, or Aleph for amar. Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera mechayev. Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera says he's liable. For chachamim potrin, and the sages exempt him. So what about the case then? What about the case of someone who writes two letters in two stages of unawareness? So this is where the chapter will close. And we've learned before, when we were learning all the halachot of truma and maser, that awareness and intention are incredibly important as part of the halacha. And here we're going to find it as well. Someone who writes two letters in two states of unawareness. So at each point, he's failed to reach the critical mass required to bring a chatat. It may be in the morning he forgot it was Shabbat, and he wrote. And in the afternoon, he forgot it was Shabbat, and he wrote. And the Mishnah spells it out, actually. Achat shacharit v'achat bein ha'arbaim. One in the morning and one at twilight. Rabban Gamliel mechayev. Rabban Gamliel would make him liable. V'chachamim potrin. And the sages would exempt him. And of course, the halacha goes according to the sages in this case. That's the conclusion of the chapter on writing. We've learned the positive cases. We've learned the negative cases. And then as we open chapter 13 tomorrow, we will go in, as we go chapter 13 next week, we'll look at different kinds of melachot. This is the end of the section on writing, and there are 4 Mishnayot on writing, more, I think, than any other of the Av Melachot, which we're going to look at, other than carrying. And I'll stop there and just open it up for questions.